Welcome to episode 2 on this transatlantic cruise. I'm on Royal Caribbean Symphony of the Seas and we're heading from Barcelona in Spain to Fort Lauderdale in Florida. Join me for this episode where I show you what it's like to experience our first port of call in Valencia and our first full day at sea, which actually happens to be Halloween. First time I've spent Halloween on a cruise ship. And finally in this episode we visit Cadiz in western Spain. This is our last port of call before we start the long journey across the Atlantic, so last chance to set foot on dry land, last chance to stock up. Come with me and I'll show you how I spent an inexpensive day exploring this wonderful city. Despite it being the end of October, the weather today was pretty good. Temperatures got up to 23 degrees and it was blue skies and sunshine for the most part. So my plan for the day was to explore Valencia Old Town. Valencia is one of the larger cities in Spain and the cruise port is located quite a distance outside of the main area. So I opted to take the shuttle service provided by Royal Caribbean. That was a cost of $25 round trip and the journey time took about 20 minutes or so. Now that would mount up quite a bit if there were a number of people in the family. So there is also a public bus option a short distance from the actual cruise terminal, and I did also see some people actually setting off on foot as well. The drop-off point for the shuttle service was near the Torre del Serrano or Serrano Gate, which is one of the main gates into the old town. Up until yesterday I had no definite plan as regards what I was going to do in exploring Valencia. Eventually I decided the best option was to book a tour. So I actually booked onto what is called a free walking tour, but basically you give a contribution to the guide at the end of the tour. And that worked out really well. It was about 2.5 hours. The meeting point was in Plaza de la Virgin, which is just a short distance inside the gate that I entered into the old town. It's quite easily found just outside the basilica. And from there, it was a case of the tour guide taking us to several places, explaining the history, explaining various things about the culture and so on. Just around the corner from where the tour started is Valencia Cathedral, entirely distinct from the basilica. Now, the cathedral dates from the 13th century, and from what our tour guide explained, it accommodates the Holy Chalice, which is thought to have been used at the Last Supper, so that's pretty amazing. Even early in the morning there were queues building to access the cathedral. I think admission is €9 and separately the bell tower can also be accessed for a smaller admission fee. But honestly, the way the day panned out, I didn't have time to join the queues. The walking tour ended at the Central Market, which according to our guide is actually one of the largest fresh produce markets in Europe. It's open from Monday to Saturday, I think from about 6:30 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. It has a huge array of food and fresh produce, but it also has other things like souvenir stalls, so quite a good place to pick up a few mementos. After that, it was back to exploring the rest of the old town at my leisure. Shuttle buses were in plentiful supply to take guests back to the ship when I headed back mid-afternoon. En route we passed what is known as, I'll give the English name, City of Arts and Sciences Monuments. That's those futuristic looking buildings, and apparently the whole complex includes a science museum, an aquarium, an opera house and an IMAX cinema. So it seems like a really good place to also spend time perhaps exploring on a shore excursion. With Royal Caribbean having moved to providing just one cabin service per day, it's a little bit odd to arrive back in the afternoon and find my town animal ready and waiting. Used to be a nighttime feature, but hey, first world problems. Anyways, getting back on board a little bit ahead of the crowd on a port day is always nice. It's that sense of having more scope to explore the ship without dealing with crowds, and it's also a good opportunity to get a comfortable spot in the solarium. Day beds are always at a premium, so it was nice to actually find one and chill out there for some of the afternoon. As I had a reservation for the Aqua Show later on this evening, I decided that dinner was in the boardwalk area. So I headed down there, and en route to my dining destination, I couldn't resist but having a go on the carousel. And honestly, it's all adults, so I didn't feel bad about it. So I decided to dine in Johnny Rockets. Now that's the American diner on board. There is an upcharge, and that basically came in at, I think it was $16. So that was $12.99 plus the service charge. It's a flat fee and you can order what you want on the menu. The milkshakes are extra, but they're covered in either the drinks package or, in my case, I was using one of the Diamond loyalty vouchers. So after that, it was nicely timed to head out to see the Aqua Show. Royal Caribbean have a number of different Aqua Shows that they perform on various ships. So the one tonight was called Hero, and it really is so spectacular to see this. It's unbelievable to think that this is on the back of a moving ship. Needless to say, a show as unique as this is incredibly popular, so I would absolutely recommend that you book it in advance using the app. I had certainly done that. Now there are standby lines, but you can never guarantee. In this case, you can see the far side of the seating was actually free, so it wouldn't have been a problem. Also, bear in mind, if you decide to sit in some of those front rows, you will absolutely be in the splash zone. Walking the tightrope on a moving ship, definitely not for the faint-hearted. Unfortunately, the show was cut short about 15 minutes before the end. Not quite sure why. It was announced that there was technical difficulties. I suspect it might have actually been due to the fact that the wind had certainly whipped up. The ship was noticeably rocking, so presumably it would be unsafe for the performers to continue. Hopefully I'll get to see it before the end of the cruise again and find out what the finale would have been like. Welcome to our first sea day. It's been a bit bizarre today. There's been so much going on that has been completely unexpected. First up, a parade on the promenade. I hadn't quite expected to encounter pirates and Vikings in the promenade this morning. That and the fact that a lot of the ship has been decorated for Halloween were slightly surprising. After all that mid-morning mayhem, I decided to head to the dining room for a leisurely lunch. Nice and tranquil. A lot of this footage was actually captured after lunch, when the dining room wasn't quite set up for dinner service in all areas. But it just gives a sense of what the space is like, what the table settings are like, and what the space between those tables are like, which I know is quite important to some people. Later in the evening, the main show in the theatre was a musical act, a guest act called Forever, four-piece group backed by the Royal Caribbean Orchestra. They're a little bit like El Divo, and they're generally a staple on Royal Caribbean ships in Europe during the summer as one of the headliner acts.
Cuando sono solo sogno all'orizzonte, manca le parole. Sulle finestre mostra tutto il mio cuore che hai acceso. Tu say goodbye.
Later, the Halloween celebrations were in full swing. What surprised me when I got up this morning was to find that so many of the areas of the ship had been magically transformed overnight and decorated for Halloween. And what surprised me even more during the day was to find out that there were so many people who were actively participating. And I don't mean kids, I mean the adult contingent on the ship. As well as those who had gone all out for the costume parade, there were also quite a number of people, even at dinner time, who had token gestures to Halloween. So lots of witches' hats, pointy devil's ears, and so on. And that was all followed by, yes, another balloon drop.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, happy
It's day 4 of the cruise. It's our last port of call in Europe. We're in Cadiz in the Andalusia region of western Spain. Now, when you see this advertised on cruise line itineraries, quite often it'll be detailed as being Seville, but Seville is actually some distance inland, so don't be fooled, we're definitely in Cadiz. Now, there were a range of shore excursions on offer to go further afield, including to Seville or to Gibraltar, and indeed some of those could actually be done one doing it themselves rather than on an organised tour. But realistically, given that this is our last port of call, I wasn't taking the chance of doing any of that. I was perfectly happy to spend my day exploring the old town in Cadiz, which is really handily located relative to the cruise ship dock. Literally just cross a main road and you're into the old town area. The old town is actually made up of a whole series of very narrow streets which open out into lovely plazas just like this. Cadiz is reputed to be the oldest settlement in Western Europe. It dates back an amazing 3,000 years. So undoubtedly, in some place that historic, there's plenty to explore. Now, as it happened, we visited on the 1st of November, and that's actually All Saints' Day. As a religious holiday, that's observed quite strictly in Spain. That had both positive and negatives for our visit. On one hand, it meant that for most of the morning it was uncrowded in the old town. It was really just the passengers from Symphony of the Seas that seemed to be around. But it also meant that shops were closed, and most significantly it meant that the new cathedral, which is one of the most impressive buildings in Cadiz that you can see here, that was actually closed. On Sundays and on religious holidays, it doesn't open to the public until 1:30. So that took away from the opportunities of what one could visit. But nonetheless, it was a beautiful day. It was a perfect opportunity to go and walk along the promenade. For me, it felt a little bit too chilly to think about having a beach day. But nonetheless, I did take a lovely walk out on a causeway to a fortress. You can see it in the distance there. It's called the Castillo de San Sebastian. It seems to be a very popular walkway out. I don't know if it's actually covered over in high tide, but certainly it's very pleasant to go out there. Again, this was closed, although I gathered that it is open at times and hosts cultural events and exhibits and so on. From the promenade, I made my way back through the old town, this time taking a different route. Cadiz is made up of so many narrow streets and alleyways opening out into larger plazas. It's just a really interesting place to explore. I came across the central market en route. Now again, because it was a holiday, that actually wasn't open to its normal scale. It had a number of eating places, coffee docks, and some bar counters that were actually just beginning to open at lunchtime. As well as that, it was an area that also had a fairly large supermarket. It was a Carrefour supermarket, which was proving incredibly popular with Symphony of the Seas passengers. As you can see there in the footage, there's also a hop-on, hop-off bus tour. Now, because Cadiz isn't terribly big, and undoubtedly that bus is not getting in around the old town, I'm not really sure how beneficial it would actually be, but perhaps it's something you would want to check out. Also, if you are interested in potentially doing a trip further afield by yourself, the main train station is just about a 5-minute walk from where the ship actually docked. Now, that has trains that go to Seville, for example. I think there are up to about 16 trains a day. It takes about an hour and 35 minutes each way, but just remember, be back at the ship on time. I think most passengers on Symphony of the Seas weren't really taking the risk of doing that kind of exploring today, because after all, there's no place to catch up with the ship if you miss it this afternoon. Back on board after my day exploring, I headed to the top deck to watch the sunset as we began to sail away. It looked pretty good, the weather looked good, but the captain made an announcement. He's told us that we're heading out into pretty rough seas tonight and all day tomorrow. He suggested that people take seasick medication and to be careful when walking around the ship. So that doesn't really bode well. We'll have to see how it goes. For now, we're heading out into the prospect of 9 days without seeing sight of land. Fingers crossed it goes okay, but at least we're getting a time change and a lie-in in the morning. Please consider subscribing if you want to follow the rest of my transatlantic journey. For now, good night.